The tech team is always like linemen in football. You only notice them when they miss a block or something gets screwed up. So give the tech team a round of applause. They make the magic happen and do a fantastic job. So we really appreciate you guys. You got to start my clock over though, don't you? No, it's all right. So. Are these my slides? All right, we're just going to get going. So, all right. So last weekend we did a micro mission project. How many of you have heard of a micro mission project? Anybody out there? So I coined the term just yesterday as I was writing the sermon, and I then Googled it to see if I had made it up or not, and I did find a website called micromission.online. It was a secular humanitarian site, and their concept was micromission, and they defined it as an extremely small act of humanitarian aid. And I was like, okay, that's reasonable enough. I would define a micromission project as an extremely small act of faith in action. And just because something is small in size doesn't mean it's small in impact, right? So we had an opportunity last weekend to partner with the Hope Center, which is part of Building Hope in the City, and the Hope Center is for refugees and immigrants in Cleveland. As many of you probably know, Cleveland is one of the landing spots for lots of immigrants and refugees throughout the world. And so what we did was we partnered with Thrivent Financial, which is a company I work for. But one of the things they like to do these micro missions called action teams. And so they give members, people that work with Thrivent with their finances, $250 to do these action teams, these micro mission projects. So Thrivent donated $250. And then the church partnered with us, and we bought materials to support the refugees and immigrants as they're studying to become American citizens. They have to take a test. Probably, on a side note, probably a test that many of us would not pass. But so we bought flashcards with that seed money, and then at our booth at the South Euclid Rock the Block, and then our tailgate on Sunday, many of you probably saw the booth set up, and it said, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me." And so what we did was we took those flashcards, and then we gave opportunities to purchase books that they also use for their studies. In total is about $36, I think, somewhere in that range, for us to buy those two things. But we wanted to allow everyone to participate in the missions, because whether you have lots of finances to do micro missions or not, we all have the ability to bless others. So we invited people to fill out cards of encouragement, and then we put packets together. Flora sent me some packets that were going to be sent over to the Hope Center. Because of your generosity, we are going to be able to bless with materials and spiritual encouragement over 40 students that are working towards becoming American citizens. So that really captures the heart of what the letter of James is all about. In James 1:22, it says, "Be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves." The book of James is really about putting your faith in action. So if I haven't met you, my name is Curt Bissell. I am, in fact, the online campus pastor, so only appropriate that I break the technology. I want to say hi to my friends online. It's so good to see you, and I hope it's good to see me. They usually see me behind a computer screen. So we're going to spend the next 5 weeks in the book of James, and the book of James is actually a letter written by James. It says it just says written by James, a follower of Jesus. Church tradition tells us that it was James, the brother of Jesus. Now, we can't verify that, and it doesn't really matter. What we do know for sure is that this was written either by James the person or by, a collection of people who were gathering James's ideas of faith, his greatest hits, and they're writing it kind of in his voice. This is a letter, as I said, and the New Testament is kind of made up of the Gospels and the book of Acts, which are the accounts and the kind of the happenings of the ministry of Jesus, and then the early church, and then you have a ton of letters, and a lot of these letters are written by Paul, and he writes them to very specific churches. And so when he writes a letter to the Corinthians, if you don't understand what is going on in Corinth, you won't understand the letter. And there's been, there's thousands of years of history at this point of misinterpreting, especially Paul's letters, because we don't understand the context. Before I go down that path any further, what I will say is this: the letter of James is written to the 12 tribes of Israel that have been scattered around the world. So he is writing to lots of churches. Whereas Paul is writing to individual churches or individual people, James writes to a lot of different churches. And so he's writing to a really diverse group of Christians. They're in different contexts and different cultures. And so he's writing with the goal of presenting transcendent truth and practical applications of faith that span a lot of different contexts. It's one of the reasons I love the book of James, is because it's written in a way that while we still have to contextualize it and apply it, there are a lot more universal truths that we don't have to understand every little minutia of how the women were bickering or how the men were coming hungry, and all of the stuff you see in some of the other letters. So I really like it. The book of James is really, it's New Testament Proverbs. It's New Testament wisdom for living and putting our faith into action. And so the overall theme of the letter of James is faith in action. In James 2:14, it says, "What good is it if you say you have faith but do not have works?" What good is it if you don't put your faith into action and make things happen? I'm going to show a short video clip here from a famous British actor, Michael Caine. How many of you know Michael Caine? Okay, so Michael Caine is 90 years old, so he's been acting for a long time. So Chip's not here, he can't defend himself, which is good at the moment, because he likes to quote like really old films. So Cider House Rules, how many of you know that one and have seen it and liked it? Okay, a good portion of you. What's the average age of the folks that raised their hand out there? Because I can't see everybody real clearly. Little bit, like a generation above me, maybe? Okay. So that's the old reference. Michael Caine is also in the Dark Knight trilogy, the Batman trilogy, as Alfred. Have a lot of you seen that? I see a few younger hands coming up there. Okay, so I successfully spanned multiple generations because we are a multi-generational, multi-ethnic, diverse church, all right? We are connecting a diverse group of people who share a common brokenness to Jesus. So I covered that with Michael Caine. So with Michael Caine here, he's doing an interview, and he shares one of his life philosophies. So I want us to listen to that now.
And finally, I came across a line which I just wanted you to sort of explain to me. You said that if you did have one philosophy of life, it was use the difficulty.
Yes, use the difficulty.
What does that mean?
Well, I got it from, I was rehearsing a play when I was a very young actor, and I had to come in this scene. It was a stage play. I'm behind the flats, waiting to open the door. There was an improvised scene between a husband and wife going on inside. And then they got carried away, and they started throwing things, and he threw a chair, and it lodged in the doorway, and I went to open the door, and I just got my head round, and I said, "I'm sorry, sir, I can't get in." He said, "What do you mean?" He said, "There's a chair there." He said to me, "Use the difficulty." I said, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, if it's a comedy, fall over it. If it's a drama, pick it up and smash it." He said, "Use the difficulty." Now, I took that into my own life. You ask my children, they say, directly anything bad happens, they go, "We've got to use the difficulty. How can we work? What can we get out of this, you know? Use the difficulty." And so there's never anything so bad that you cannot use that difficulty. If you can use it 0.25% to your advantage, you're ahead. You didn't let it get you down, you know? That's my philosophy. Use the difficulty. Also, added philosophy is avoid them if you can. At all times.
Use the difficulty. James says it this way. Dear brothers and sisters, when many trials and troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. James is saying use the difficulty. Now, as we're getting into this letter about, wisdom and faith and action, I ask the question of why does James start here? Why does James start with this, hey, guys, life's hard. So let's focus on that first, and then we'll apply the wisdom. And I think it's because James understands this. We live in a broken world where difficulty is always going to happen, where trials and tribulations and pain and suffering, it's part of life. And if your philosophies, if your theology, what you believe about God and you believe about your faith, if it doesn't hold up in the difficult times, in the trials of life, if it folds in that moment, it's not true wisdom, it's not faith in action, it doesn't work. So he starts there and he says, look, if you can't have a faith that is rooted in God, that can persevere and guide you through the difficult times, then is that really faith? Is that really how we can put our faith in action? Or is that a meaningless, and Paul says, a dead faith? So James starts there. Now, one of the kind of applications of this sometimes is God won't give you more than you can handle. How many of you believe that's in the Bible? You guys figured this out already. I set you up wrong. I set the other service up really good. So let me go like this. So 1 Corinthians 10:13, it says, God is faithful, and he will not let you be tested beyond your strength. But with the testing, he will also provide a way out so that you may be able to endure it. So how many of you would say God won't give you more than you can handle? And I would still say that's false. Here's why. Because when we say this, and I know all of you have heard this said to you, some well-meaning person, some cute little Christian, oh, God won't give you more than you can handle. And James calls BS here, because right at the start, he's like, look, life's going to be hard. When we say God won't give you more than you can handle, the emphasis here is God won't give you, that God is doing the giving, that God is giving you the difficulties. And when we engage in that belief and we say, well, if God is giving us the difficulty, I must have done something wrong. And if I've done something wrong, I really need to kind of hide away and pull away from God and kind of fix this on my own. It's the opposite of what we need to do. So there's this theological term called theodicy. Can you guys say theodicy with me? Did a good job, all right. So theodicy, if you break it down, theo means God, and disi, that's not really a word, but it's kind of justice. So it's talking about the justice of God. The dynamic here is kind of captured with Lex Luthor in the Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice. I don't know when that one was out, but I feel like that might hit another generation. Anybody out there seen that one? All right, so Lex Luthor, it's like all the really young people. Awesome, all right. So Lex Luthor says this. He says, if God is all-powerful, he cannot be all good. If God is all-powerful, he cannot be all good. And if he's all good, then he cannot be all-powerful. Because Lex Luthor looks at the world and says, well, there's evil in the world, therefore God can't be all good and all powerful together. Because otherwise there wouldn't be evil. So this is flawed. I mean, this is very, very not, anti-Christian in terms of its worldview. And so theodicy, as a Christian understanding, says we can reconcile that God is all powerful and all good, and also evil exists in the world. So I'm going to kind of walk through a very, very rough kind of overview of theodicy. This is a whole sermon series on its own. And I'll tell Pastor Chip we should do it. So Pastor Chip, when you watch this later, do you think he's going to watch it later? Yes. Pastor Chip, they believe in you. So this is just kind of a very simple breakdown. But it says, evil exists in the world. God is all powerful and God is all good. But God is not, or evil is not caused by God. Okay, so that's the premise of it. This is how we follow the logic then. Evil exists because free will exists. Evil exists because we have the choice to obey or disobey, to do what is good or to do what is evil. So evil exists because free will exists. Free will exists because love exists. Love is a choice. You cannot force someone to love you. So if we are going to have love in the world, free will has to exist. Why do we have love in the world? Well, love exists because God is love. So if you work that from the bottom up, we have a God who is love, who is all good, who is all powerful, because of the greatest of things is love. So God is love, and love exists. Because love exists, free will exists. Because free will exists, evil exists. And so we can have that dichotomy between an all-powerful, all good, all loving God and the fact that evil exists in the world. Let me put it very simply. God does not cause bad things to happen. God is not punishing you when you're in the midst of difficulties and trials and struggles. Now, have you made bad decisions that led to this place of, struggle? Yeah, maybe, right? But that's called natural consequences. We try to parent that way. Instead of, we don't really punish our kids a whole lot, but we do let them experience their bad choices, right? So there are times when God says, okay, natural consequences, but God causing the bad things to happen, or saying well, all things happen for a reason. God's causing all of these things to happen just doesn't fall in line with our Christian understanding of theodicy and really the fundamental understanding of who God is. And that's where James is starting. He's saying is when troubles of any kind come your way, he's not saying when you have sinned and fallen away and God is punishing you, but instead he's saying troubles are coming, and when troubles come, God wants to use your difficulty. God wants to come alongside of you. So instead of feeling guilt and shame and condemnation, might you feel the loving arms of God open to you and saying, come with me, we will walk through this together, and I will bring good out of this situation. I will use your difficulty for good. In verse 2, it uses this word opportunity. It says, whenever there is difficulty, there is opportunity. And so the way I want to articulate that is when there are obstacles, there are opportunities. Obstacles equal opportunities. And so I want to talk a little bit as we kind of wrap through the sermon, finish through the message today, is how can we transform obstacles into opportunities? And I think in verses 5, 6, and 7, God begins to walk us through how to transform obstacles into opportunities. So the first thing is that obstacles become opportunities when we seek wisdom. So verse 5 says, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. Remember how I said God is not punishing you when you hit difficulty? It says it right there. When you go to God and say, hey, God, how do I get through this situation? Give me wisdom. It says God is generous. And he's not going to rebuke you. He's not going to go, figure it out on your own, kid. You screwed up. You get yourself out of it. That's not the heart of our God. And so wisdom, when we seek wisdom, what we're doing is trying to say, how can we take the knowledge of our situation, the experience, the information, and apply it in practical ways that will move us through that difficulty, that will allow us to use it for good, right? And so we begin, that I think is really where wisdom comes out of. As I get older, it's more and more important to me that the voices I'm listening to in life have been through a thing or two. So I used to listen to lots of, motivational speakers and life coaches and, consultants and stuff like that. And podcasts, I've been listening to podcasts for like 15 years. And the young people in the room go, podcasts were around that long ago? There were a few. And I was listening to them. I was the only one back then. I was podcasting before it was cool. But I came to a point in my life where I said, wait a second. I'm listening to these people's maxims and, keys to leadership and the 7 habits and all of this kind of thing. And I went, some of these folks haven't been through a single day of rain in their lives. And I went, if you haven't experienced anything difficult, I'm not sure you have much to say to me. Because true wisdom is acquired when we push through difficulty, when we see the challenges in life and we come out on the other side, when we get better and not bitter. That is when true wisdom is there, and those are the people that I want to listen to. When I was about 18 years old, I was swimming in college at Baldwin Wallace, so D3. I wasn't like super fast, but I was a good swimmer. And 3 weeks before our conference meet, my freshman year, I herniated a disc in my back. Now, most of you go, well, swimming's like, relax, good therapy. Not when you swim 20 hours a week and as competitive as we did. But I herniated a disc in my back, and so for the next week and a half, they're doing x-rays, they're trying to figure out what's wrong with me. And I remember they find out about a week later, they pulled me into the trainer's office and they said, well, you herniated a disc in your back. But in the midst of all that pain, we were worried about other things like stenosis, which is a small tightening basically of the spinal cord and different things like that. So there was some worry. And I remember thinking at the time, if we can't get this figured out, I'll probably stop swimming. And I re-herniated my disc that summer. My sophomore year, I wasn't cleared to swim medically till halfway through the year. I finished out that year and I said, okay, I'm done. And I remember just because I want to brag, my freshman year, they cleared me to swim. They said, well, swim if it doesn't hurt too much. And I said, well, I don't care if it hurts too much, if I'm not going to do any more damage. So I went out 3 weeks later and won the conference championship in the 100-yard breaststroke. No. That's my stupid flex for the day. But I remember one of the things in that period of time, as an 18, 19-year-old kid, was I said, I don't want to hurt myself more so that I can't pick up my kids someday. And so I know, as I started to have kids, and then had more kids, and then more kids, I have 4 boys at home, is I started to appreciate my relationship with them in a different way. Because there was an appreciation, an understanding of picking them up. I gained some wisdom even before kids were, in the picture. I didn't have kids till almost 10 years later. But when we did, I never took for granted the ability to pick them up, right? And all of us go through different different things and challenges. So today, I don't listen to parents that have really just neurotypical kids and because and have 1 or 2 kids. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I have 4 kids that have some neuro divergent stuff. And so their wisdom, their experience doesn't help me in the same way, okay? If you think about people in your life, I would think most of the wisest people that you trust when you're in difficult times have been through it before. Anybody? Is that true for you? Okay, thank you. Got nervous. They all left, Terry, and I didn't realize it. Obstacles can be transformed into opportunities when we seek wisdom. And when that wisdom is gained through difficult times, it reminds us that we didn't get this wisdom on our own. It reminds us not to listen to our own press clippings. It reminds us that we're not all that. So the second thing ties into that then. The second way obstacles become opportunities is when our faith is rooted in God. In verse 6 it says, "But when you ask, be sure your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind." So what James is telling us is when we ask for wisdom, remember that you're not getting this on your own, that your faith and your trust is in God alone, that He is the source of all wisdom. And so that, I think, is one of the reasons why when wisdom is acquired through difficulty and through challenge, that it's all the more real and meaningful and impactful. There was a study done in recent years. They surveyed kind of self-made millionaires, entrepreneurs, that started their own thing and built a business or things like that. And what they found was 35 to 40%, depending on the survey that you read, 35 to 40% of those self-made millionaires showed signs of dyslexia. Now, that's not to say everyone with dyslexia is going to become a self-made multimillionaire. But what it's saying is those with dyslexia have some unique, distinct advantages when it comes to engaging in the world. They see the world differently. Now, as I said, though, not everyone who is neurodivergent, not everyone who has dyslexia or autism or any other kind of, neurodivergency outside of that, standard deviation one, that norm, not everyone outside of that becomes, self-made multimillionaires. So the study didn't show that 40% of people with dyslexia became millionaires. It's just that 40% of self-made entrepreneurs were dyslexic. Why is that? I believe it's because when we learn to be rooted, not just in God, but in something beyond ourselves, we can now flourish. So it's not just rooted in God, but it's rooted with a community and support. I think one of the great things about the education system today is there's so much more support for kids that struggle in different ways, that think in different ways, and we're equipping them and empowering them to not get left behind. I saw too many kids in my generation that we just ostracized them, we put them, off to the side, and all of this other stuff. We called it mainstreaming, right? How many of you remember that term? And now the default is mainstream. We don't even call it mainstreaming anymore because that's the default, is we're gathering around people that have different needs, and we're supporting them. And so I would say this is, it goes on in verse 7 and 8, and it says, such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord that don't have their faith in God. It says their loyalty is divided between God and the world. They're trying to do it on their own. They're trying to lean on worldly wisdom. It says they are unstable in everything they do. Stability comes from being rooted in something beyond yourself. And so we have opportunities through things like, micro missions to support others, to come around others, to bless others. So here's the question that I want you to ask when you find yourself in difficulty. And if you don't find yourself in any kind of struggle or difficulty right now, as Michael Caine says, try to avoid it. Like, stay in that lane for as long as possible, right? The old preacherism is don't pray for patience. There are plenty of opportunities for patience. You don't need more of them. So when you end up in that place, whether you're there or not, you will end up there again. And that is not me speaking anything ill over you. That is the reality of the world. That is James starting off this whole faith in action letter with, hey, life is hard, but God is going to bring you through it. So ask this question: how can God use this for good in my life? You can ask the question to yourself, but don't get caught in what I like to call navel gazing, right? Looking at your belly button. Because when you're looking just inside at yourself, you can't see anything beyond yourself. That's when you get depressed. That's when you fall into struggle and anxiety. And that's when the difficulties crush you and destroy you, because they can. But when we look beyond ourselves, when we root ourselves in things beyond ourselves, when we root ourselves in God, now we can move through those obstacles. We can transform obstacles into opportunities. So don't just ask yourself that question, but ask your friends and your family. Ask those who have gone through it before. My wife and I started a foundation, a nonprofit in memory of our son who passed away from a heart defect at a day old. It's about 13 years ago now. And one of the things that's important to us is to support other families who have lost children. So there was a tragic story. It was in the news back in like April. A family in Strongsville, their 5-year-old daughter passed away from basically a cold. And we knew the family. And I texted the dad, and I just said, hey, if you need anything, let me know. And all of a sudden, my phone's blowing up with texts from him. How did you go through this? How did you get through that? And he said, he's like, nobody else seems to understand what we're going through, but I know you do. And so it was an opportunity to help him be rooted in something beyond himself. Because I still don't know like kind of where their faith grounding is, and I don't need to, but I can support him. And our organization actually helped pay for the funeral. Some of you have helped with our fundraisers that we do. But it's a way for us to ground others in community and walk them through difficult times and to transform it. God is not punishing you when you go through difficult times. He's inviting you to ask for wisdom, to ask others for wisdom, to ask God for wisdom, to ask others who have been through it, can you walk through it with us? I am convinced of this, and I think James is as well. So if you don't believe me and you still think your difficulties are punishment from God, listen to this verse. I want to end with it. James says, God chose to give birth to us. Turn to your neighbor and say, God birthed you. You. He said, God chose to give birth to us, you and me, his true word, and we, out of all of creation, of all of it, became his, say it with me, prized possession. You are God's prized possession. God wants to use your difficulty to bring good, to transform it. And so I would encourage you to remember, in the midst of attacks, of struggles, of difficulties, of trials, that you still are God's prized possession, that he wants to bring you through it as you ask him for wisdom, as you stay rooted and grounded in him and something beyond yourself with a community of faith. And so when you face trials in life, may you remember that you are God's, what is it? Prized possession. And may it produce a strength and an endurance and a faith that enables you and empowers you to turn obstacles into opportunities so that you might put your faith in action. Jesus did this so many times. And one of those times that he illustrates it in Scripture is at the Last Supper, when he gathers his disciples around and says, hey, some bad stuff's going to happen, but I'm going to use it. That God is going to use it. So I'm going to invite Pastor Terry up to lead us through communion. As you receive communion today, remember, this is an act. It's what we call it means of grace. It's God acting in us to strengthen us, to use it for good.
And Jesus was motivated to offer himself because you are, as Pastor Curt said, his prized possession. And we need